It's the start of the workday at Eggleston Services in Norfolk, Virginia. One of 5,200 mostly nonprofit agencies in the country, Eggleston Services provides a variety of services to clientele in Norfolk, Virginia. Yet Eggleston, like many other community rehabilitation programs, or CRPs, differs from other companies in a significant way. Many of the individuals employed here are paid less than the federal minimum wage.
Many of the people with severe disabilities that work at CRPs have characteristics that keep their speed less than the non-disabled workers in the same industry. So we use standards to make sure those folks are treated fairly, but also can adjust their wage accordingly, so it may be less than the minimum wage.
Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, allows employers to pay special minimum wages to individuals limited by a physical or mental disability or injury. Called a commensurate wage, it reflects the worker's productivity compared to other experienced workers doing the same job in the vicinity. Among the disabilities that might affect a worker's productivity and earning power are blindness, mental illness, mental retardation, cerebral palsy, alcoholism, and drug addiction. But employers cannot pay special minimum wages simply because a worker has one of these disabilities. The law permits this only when the disability impairs a worker's productivity while performing a specific job.
As a 14C certificate holder, we cannot pay everyone a sub-minimum wage. The individual must be impaired for the job that they're assigned. For example, an individual with spina bifida who answers telephones, most likely not impaired to perform that job, whereas someone with schizophrenia would most likely be impaired if their job was to mop the floors and perform janitorial tasks.
To pay sub-minimum wages, employers must have a Section 14C certificate from the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. The certificate is typically issued to 4 types of facilities: nonprofit agencies, or NPAs, also known as community rehabilitation programs; hospitals or residential care facilities that employ patients as workers; for-profit businesses employing workers both with and without disabilities; and schools that provide jobs to students with disabilities. The Wage and Hour Division is also responsible for enforcing the FLSA, and one of its key enforcement tools is an investigation, resulting from routine procedural checks of Section 14C certificate holders, from questions arising during the 14C certification or renewal process, or from a specific complaint. The first step in an investigation involves an appointment letter sent to the CRP with the date and time a DOL investigator will visit. When they arrive, investigators will likely find a work setting different than they're used to seeing. The individuals performing the work will also be different as well, in physical appearance or abilities, mental aptitude, behavior, or skill level. They're also typically called consumers instead of employees or workers. That's because the CRPs provide more than jobs. They often offer a range of therapeutic and rehabilitation services, including job counseling, independent living skills classes, and therapy, which are neither work-related nor compensable. These services are normally provided away from the production area and are not specifically designed to improve job skills. The hours involved with these services should be recorded separately.
Many of our employees require more services than the general public that are out there working in competitive employment. The services we provide that are both therapeutic and recreation oriented are designed to enhance their lives and thereby make them more marketable on competitive employment.
The point is, the hours a consumer spends at a CRP must be assessed carefully by the investigator. For instance, downtime due to factors outside the consumer's control, like equipment failures, lack of supplies, or lack of work, is compensable. But extended downtime, which results in consumers participating in a rehabilitation session or receiving non-work services and on-site work simulations conducted for training purposes, are non-compensable. Some of the on-the-job situations might also result in non-compensable downtime.
We do have occasional behavioral issues with employees, typical refusals to work, getting tired of work, sort of passive refusal. Our staff are trained to implement activities that are non-work related in an effort to relax them from the work environment and thus bring them back later more refreshed.
Unlike the typical work setting where employees may be permitted or directed to leave the job site, leaving the site is not always practical for consumers at a CRP due to the circumstances and special transportation issues involved. This means downtime and compensable time must be carefully documented by CRP staff members, especially since it can affect a consumer's paycheck.
Factors that have an impact on the consumer's paycheck varies week to week depending on their level of productivity and the amount of work that we have available. We have electronic time cards. Our consumers clock in and clock out when they're beginning and ending their work. The staff also reviews the time each week before the time is submitted. We are very conscientious about letting the consumer and or the guardian know when differences are going to occur with their paychecks. We keep very clear records stating such.
The investigator's objective during a site visit is to ensure that each worker is paid according to the FLSA and to make compliance part of the agency's procedures.
The Wage Hour Division investigator will conduct the investigation in a courteous, professional, and expeditious manner. But because Section 14C can be technical, and because the employer may be experiencing a higher level of trepidation than normal, the investigator not only has to know the law, but has to gain the employer's confidence and trust. The best scenario for a successful investigation is when both the employer and the investigator understand what's going to happen, that the investigation process unfolds, and that they keep in mind the goal, to make sure that the worker with the disability is properly paid and in compliance with the law.
After holding an initial conference with the CRP director, the investigator will tour the facility. Following this comes a record review to determine whether those being paid a special minimum wage do in fact have a disability that impacts their productivity for the work performed. The investigator will then check to see whether they're being paid the correct commensurate wage and whether that wage is based on accurate data. A Section 14C investigation takes longer to complete than a typical FLSA investigation, on average between 60 to 80 hours.
14C investigations take longer than a typical investigation because there's so much more detail. The investigator is not only checking minimum wage and overtime, but checking things like work standards, work measurements, records of disability, and it's important that it be done thoroughly and right so that the level of compliance is properly ascertained.
The special minimum wages allowed by Section 14C offer much-needed job opportunities to individuals usually overlooked in a competitive work environment. Facilities like CRPs play a major role in helping people with disabilities find jobs, build self-esteem, and earn a paycheck. Just as important, CRP staff and DOL investigators should see they share one overall goal: making sure individuals with disabilities are being fairly and equitably paid for the work they do.
CRPs provide training in job-related skills that typically aren't available in competitive employment. Activities like coming to work on time, calling in when sick, reporting back from break on time, these are basic skills that a competitive employer expects. These are things we have to teach our employees.
A CRP that holds that 14C certificate has obligations to make sure they treat their workers with disabilities fairly. And that means having a real standard to compare to, and that we evaluate those folks at least every 6 months and 30 days after their start.
The overall goal of CRPs for their employees is to make sure that they're fairly compensated and work in healthy and safe environments.